All
and we'll
right,
go over.
we are recording. Hello, hello.
Okay, the agenda. We
Hi.
gotta figure out nations, mostly. And we were
Okay.
thinking that orcs
Recorded
would definitely
version.
gonna get the cut because the orc people
Yep.
haven't been working, really, and it doesn't seem
There's an,
super important.
I don't think
Like,
anyone
some
would miss
players
the
have
orcs.
expressed interest. I know some of my friends are always interested in making orcs, but
Yeah.
I don't think it'd be the end of the world if there weren't orcs, and that's always a race we can introduce nationless and just say that they don't necessarily have an organized nation or government, they just tend to, like, group up in bands and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Probably
the the dwarves I feel like might get a bit more pushback because the dwarves
Dwarves.
people have been working on them. However, as we've all expressed, the dwarves do seem very
Very
out of
isolated.
place. Well, not just isolated, but their lore, their aesthetic, their tone is very out of place with everything else on the server. And even then, if they are an isolated people, it does no good for the roleplay.
Plus,
Yeah.
their tech is way out of the way, and I've noticed that there has been a bit of reluctance on their end of trying to figure out how their magic works within our magic system, because when I did ask during our meeting, both Draki and the dwarf people just explained it away by saying, oh, it's magical stone that they use for their augmentations, and I'm not sure how that sits with me.
Right.
Because
And
that
that
means we
doesn't
have
sit
to
well with,
introduce
you know.
that magic stone into everything,
Yeah.
and that doesn't make them
Exactly.
unique anymore.
Because
That-
so we did come up with I do want to make sure that our magic system is kind of like the cornerstone of it. I talked with Arkin earlier. He set aside any confusion because when Draki was still head lore master, she told me, "Oh, voidal magic and elemental magic are going to be completely different things and have nothing to do with each other." But then when I told that to Arkin, he said, "No, whatever that is, just ignore that. You can do we can do what we want with the voidal magic system."
Because
We've been coming up with
I know Arkin, all he wants is to stay involved and make it so that void comes from the magic. That's what I was told.
yeah, or magic comes from the void.
Yeah,
is what
magic
you're-
comes from the
what you
void
mean.
is what I
Yeah.
mean. That's all it seems he
Yes.
wants, and then we can interact with it however the
And we
heck
came up
want
with
to.
the thread. We came up with the system of the threads and how versatile that could be. I
Yeah.
think that fits very well.
But my
I think
biggest
we should
issue
do-
with the dwarf team per se is it seems
Yeah.
they want their people to be completely isolated. They didn't even consider how they were going to interact with other races, and that won't go over well in a place that is a nation that needs interaction,
And
especially
like
if
I
we
said,
have a small player base.
Yeah.
And I don't like their reluctance to work with other team members outside of their
Yeah.
own lore.
Yeah, and
That
Another
is
thing,
common amongst many dwarven communities, and I have a suggestion to kind of
Yeah?
maybe. So
Yeah, let's hear
dwarves
it.
still exist, but aren't necessarily like a nation that is just on their own, you know?
So, yeah, I had a very interesting idea regarding that, having just a people without a nation.
Oh, we can
Um,
make Al-Qadir kind of like that, since that's what it is anyway. It seems to want to be the de facto mixing pot with the humans and the
Yeah.
dark elves anyway.
Right.
How, I have a point to talk about with that later, but for the moment, here's an interesting idea. So, pre-World War II, Jewish people were basically a completely nomadic, type of people. They didn't really have their own a nation dedicated to their religion. They were just, out and about people. You could find Jewish people pretty much anywhere. I think that could be an interesting idea with dwarves. How there's not that many. There might not be many of them, but you could find them in the weirdest places. You know.
Right. I think a good example of that in like modern literature and stuff, and it's kind of where I came up with the concept, was the idea of Thorin Oakenshield and his company. When Erebor fell to Sauron, they were blacksmiths in tiny villages and settlements across the lands. They worked in Gondor. They worked in, like, with the Men of the Lake and otherwise, as just blacksmiths and simple people. not kings and princes and warriors and stuff. And some of them were mercenaries. And I think that would be an interesting concept, that it's these people that have a culture, but it's kind of lost. There's this sense that something has happened to push them out of their homes, and also creates an idea that they need to reclaim their homes, which gives the possibility of a dwarven nation being created through RP, which is fantastic. Yeah. And then gives them connections to the rest of the nations because they were in them.
And I think that would be very interesting if, you know, we decide that, you know, hey, we might have it where, though a nation might have a predominant race, they might have members of other races living within their cities. So for, you know...
Yes, I think that the nations are sort of have become the races themselves, except for Al-Qadir. When I was working on Al-Qadir, there was sort of a push to make it more like everyone is welcome. So like
and I'm considering having Itokapewa not just be, you know, open to tourists and tourism, but open to just letting people live there and, you know, just to do long-term commerce there. And
I don't understand the dwarven desire for a completely isolated nation in a server that doesn't have the player base for that. You know, if we had upwards of like 3,000 players on every day, and that's what we were aiming for and what we were expecting, that would make more sense. But as it stands, we don't even have 1,000 on the Discord server, so there's no way we can make that happen as spread out as people are.
I don't even think admitted that we're dwarves. I don't think.
That's another thing to mention, is that it doesn't seem that there's many dwarven characters, if any at all. And I know there have been goblins. People seem to love goblins, but we can do sort of what the old server did, where they were just a moving tribal race that don't have a nation.
That could be a good idea. And, you know, in terms of that, I always like to state that, you know, whenever you're a brand new roleplay server trying to get off the ground, you'd be lucky to have, you know, 20 people on at peak hours, which is, you know, why I do think we should definitely try and, which is why I suggested we reduce the number of nations in the first place, because even with 5 nations with 20 people, and we somehow manage to get an even split among them, that's only 4 people per nation. It's not going to be like that. The majority of those 20 people on during peak hours will likely be humans and elves.
Yeah.
I do like the idea.
No, you can go. You can go.
I'm kind of stuck on the idea of keeping the dwarven buildings. There's already a building near Matrona, which I will get to in a moment. Matrona that is supposed to be corrupted and have sort of corruption, and I really do like
corruption
that idea.
Is an interesting thing.
Exactly.
I think that we talk about, and we should figure out how that fits. Is what I think it can fit.
I think it can fit. But my point is that I think that the dwarves could work much better as like the Dwemer from Skyrim. I think that would create a very interesting case of mystery.
What that allows is an excuse to build ruins all over Eden. Which would be a great idea.
My only problem with that is that it's a super duper common trope, and I know something that at least Arkan didn't want, and a lot of the leaders didn't want, were things that were common in other situations. You know, it's common in Skyrim, it's common on our old server, it's common in literature, you know. These dwarves are known for being this lost race. And I'm not sure if we want to include a trope like that, even though it would be cool.
Well, to be fair, if we are interested in going against, here's my take: is if we are thinking about trying to go against the grain and setting ourselves apart, saying no dwarves is a statement and a half at that.
Definitely in that regard. And another point to make is that when we're talking about tropes, a lot of these nations are inspired by very classic works.
Well,
like
that's not
Warhammer.
necessarily what I mean, because we can take inspiration from other things, but what I was told by Archon is that he doesn't want things to be common. He doesn't want things to be like super duper like D&D or super duper like Warhammer, even though they can take inspiration from those things. It was why I wanted to take the tieflings in a completely different direction than what is known. It's why the wood elves are a bit stranger than we know them, or the orcs don't take completely a Warhammer stance.
Or why the, lizardmen are basically just really weird.
Yeah.
Amazonian woman, what?
Because I know Archon wanted this idea of weird and people are not.
I know that Archon and her Von Admiral especially are also really interested in introducing as much lore that really sets fables and fantasy apart from other role plays out there. They want to be something where people look at it and are intrigued because they want it to be, I know they want it to be fantasy, but a breath of fresh air in terms of fantasy role play. They don't want it to
something
feel
that
samey.
You see something from it and you can go, oh, that's fantasy and fables, and not just, oh, that's fantasy. It needs to be identifiable to the server itself, and that's why tonality is important.
I think that can be done with Dwarven Ruins. Especially, mentioning the corruption thing. It doesn't need to be discussed right now, but I think, instead of just oh, they're gone, they're vanished, booga booga, I think that would enhance
I do think that this is definitely, well, regardless of what happens, we do need to talk about this with, Archon and her Von Admiral and the people working on the dwarves.
We want to formulate our plan and our ideas and our reasons before we present them, though.
Right. And even then, if we decide, okay, dwarves get the axe, orcs get the axe, that leaves us with 5 nations still.
Well, and, then, we don't... Well, like Sai and you have said, we don't need to completely murder them. I do like the idea of perhaps dwarven refugees. There's a lot of talk about this great collapse that happened, and they wanted to leave it purposely ambiguous, which, is a pain in the ass for anybody who cares.
For dwarves?
Yeah.
Poke.
And so we were thinking, or I was thinking that this great collapse could have spread the dwarves out into the world instead of perhaps isolating them, and then they still don't get their nation, but they get to exist, and they have that possibility of establishing a new dwarven city in RP, like Sai suggested.
I think that's a good idea. I like the idea of
somebody can take it from them.
The dwarves being sort of like a race without a proper home, where they travel, or they exist pretty much wherever they can, and they, hold on to what little culture they have. So, let's say in Itokapewa, because I am kind of leaning towards the idea of, if the people wants to live there, they can live there. They just might, not get as much attention as other, Quetzalcoatl. There might be, let's say, a dwarven quarter in the, in Itokapewa. There might be a dwarven community there. I think that would be a really cool idea of saying, hey, just because this people has, a lot to do with, this specific race and these specific people with their own heritage, there is still these subcultures that exist within those walls. And I think exploring subcultures is...
I don't know what other cultures. We have a few cultures that are accepting of other races, like
the tieflings in the Itokapewa.
Yeah, we have a high elf that lives in our city, and we have a goblin that lives in our city.
Yeah.
We're very welcoming. I just forgot the humans and the dark elves. Their city seems to be very welcoming in a mixed pot. The humans would probably welcome dwarves.
So in terms of dwarves, I think it would be a really interesting idea to kind of combine the two ideas, where the dwarven capital, because of the Great Collapse, has fallen to complete ruin, and that way they can keep their cool build, and we can continue those interesting themes out into the world. It's just they won't have that dwarven extremism because they'll be refugees, and it'll be up to the players to reconnect with each other and reestablish a dwarven nation.
And then maybe later on, after we've played for a while, after the server's been open, we can discover those dwarven ruins as an event of some sort.
Yeah.
What do you
So,
think of
I
that,
think that's
Snow?
Yeah. I think that's a good pitch to bring to, the admins and the people who are currently working on the dwarves, or maybe not them. I have a feeling that the people working on the dwarves will be pretty defensive about, trying to keep the nation that they've been working on, for a while, and understandably so.
Well,
I understand that, but I will,
Yeah,
try and talk
but
to them.
I think it's a good pitch. I think it's a good suggestion to bring to them. I think that's an ideal way of dealing with, trying to lower the number of nations without necessarily getting rid of all of that work and all of that, and all of those ideas. Right, and we can still keep aspects of their religion and whatnot, but just cut back on, societal structure and isolate and their solitary stuff.
All that stuff, because if anyone wants to play a dwarf, even if they don't live there, if they live somewhere else, they still need to know what they're like. If they're refugees, they're still going to adhere to their beliefs and their religions.
But it'll be
Well, I
way
think, like I
less
said,
of an extremist
keeping
view.
religions, keeping belief systems, yes. But in terms of social hierarchy, that probably will be null and void, considering they're going to exist in the social hierarchy of other nations.
Hey, Dash.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your input here, but I think some other people have some ideas on what should be done. So
Right.
I saw you raising your hand.
As a brief addendum, I think it's also interesting that if we do it this way, we can keep their idea of these augmentations and their magic stones, but completely keep them away from the player base so they don't become overpowered. Like, it'd be really cool to find a lost palace full of gargoyle men that have since died.
But you're right.
I think that's a cool idea as well. That also gives us some time to, for us to figure out exactly how do these magical stones fit in with the magic system that we've been crafting.
Yeah. Psycho, you had a thought?
When it comes to... How do I put this? When it comes to, races and things like that, my biggest thing is, especially when they're scattered races, and this is just from a general standpoint as world builder and a DM and stuff, a lot of times they will keep some aspects of their religion and their race and ideas and things like that, but they will also adapt to their region and have different subcultures based on that. Like a Quetzalcoatl dwarf may be very different from a Hadriana dwarf, just because those cultures are so incredibly different.
Yeah,
And they are
that's
surrounded by them so much. So, yes, there will need to be some base lore, just as a general wide culture, but I think there will also be smaller subsections that will depend on each nation, and each nation can play with that as their own, and each dwarf in those nations can play with that.
That's exactly what I was thinking, and that's going to be another thing for me to add to my own massive lore document. But I think that's I think that's definitely something that'll be worth adding to figure out. Okay, what is it like to live as the member of another race in a predominantly city predominantly of X race? So in Hadriana, if they decide to be open to the idea of non-humans living there, what would it be like to be a lizard person trying to make a living in Hadriana? What would it be like as a dwarf
They are
who's
open
lost
to
their
everyone.
home?
You just
But,
can't expect rules of power.
Yeah.
But that is something that they need to develop. Hold on, let me write that down. Hadriana.
Yeah, because I don't. As far as I was told, they let people within their borders. I didn't know about people actually living there as residents, but they let people in their borders so long as they acknowledge Hadriana's religion as true, which might be difficult for some people, but for people who lived there their whole life, it might be it might be a given. An elf who has been born and raised in Hadriana might follow their religion as opposed to the family pantheon. You know, I think that'd be a very interesting. I think that's a very interesting idea, just to discover, you know, going more in depth of, you know, subcultures in here, giving suggestions as to how someone might play the member of one race living in the nation of another's.
Oh, Psycho will be right back.
So, I think that's a good idea. Moving forward, speaking of nations,
What are we gonna do about Matrona? Because obviously Draki is still nation leader. However, she's still doing some not so great things. Like, I know that she saved the builds to another server, and the band builders have basically taken them and put them on Minecraft, Planet Minecraft, for anybody to see and download, and claim that they're theirs.
That
I'm
seems
not gonna-
less like a lore issue and more like a management issue.
Exactly, and here's where I'm getting to. If Draki were to be banned for good, who is going to take over?
Well, it'd probably be the same. It'd probably be the same process with, you know, someone taking over Al-Qadir or the Orcs. We'd list it as a you know, free nation to take, and then they can then whoever's interested can then take over. However, the issue therein lies with the fact that Draki has actually developed a good bit about the Wood Elves. Granted, I know that she hasn't written much about it because she was trying to find someone to help her with the writing of it.
Well, why don't we just hand it over to Psych in the event Draki gets banned? Because he's already working with her. He's just new.
he is? I thought Psych was working with,
It's listed on the project overview that Psych
Oh.
is helping Draki.
That's weird. That's interesting because Psych, you know, messaged, you know, sent a message in the
Yeah, I saw him do it.
He took a Paywa chat specifically because he was told that I needed some, you know, assistance.
Well, you
like
can...
a ton of projects, and he's helping a lot of
Well,
people.
like I said, I feel like that's one thing that definitely should be, you know, addressed, is figuring out who is working on what.
Yeah, we should reestablish who the hell's working on what.
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned to Moon earlier, one idea that I feel like we should do is just a general review of every single piece of lore that has been written for the server. We should no longer think of a finished lore as purely canonical because, you know, like I've mentioned with Sycra in another call, you know, Fables and Fantasy at the moment lacks a tone for the world of Eden as a whole. You know, all these other nations have, you know, varying tones and varying, you know, ideas, and I want to make sure that, you know, and while I do think that, yeah, we could look at all these nations and see, yes, these nations all exist in the same world, I want to make it very clear that every nation, every race has its part to play in a cohesive theme of the world.
I asked everybody, I went through all the journals and I asked like what their major like exports and productions and things are.
Yeah.
But you know what? I got like three nations answered me, and that's it.
So, would
So,
you?
I'd like to make a comment. I think, personally, the nations should be set aside for a quick moment because I think that the lore of the Void lore and the Magic lore really, really need to be developed. Because while I do think that we've developed quite a bit about the nations, about the world through the nations, I know that a lot of people have had questions about the magic, how it works, and you know, you guys have brought up how like we don't know how each nation uses it and
Well,
what differentiates them.
My
And
big
Pies and I
Well, hold on.
have-
My big plan was, since I am almost done with the general Tiefling doc, once I finish the shorthand version of that, I was going to immediately dive into the Void and get Archon with me and be like, hey, how the hell are we going to do this so that that can be established more for other people, since I already have a lot to do. But I took it on as my main thing, and my plan was to mush the Void and Magic together so they could be worked on all at once.
Well, yeah. The
that's
idea was
important
that Magic and the Void are very much intertwined. Magic exists as, you know, a form of tampering with the Void, as we've discussed in earlier conversations. So, you know, yeah.
I think it needs to be worked hand in hand. But yes, you know, we have so many ideas, but we really need to really need to set the world in stone.
I feel like
what are we capable of? What is available to us?
So, have you heard Pies and I's idea for magic lore?
The chords?
Yeah, the chords and the strings. Yeah.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So we're that's
And Lilith, I was there when you were developing.
Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, if nothing has changed in that regard, we're going to continue developing that. We've mostly put that on hold because we've been putting a lot of focus on the nations. That yeah. However, if we're going to be shifting priorities and, you know, putting a little bit more focus on the magic and the fabric of the world, because those two are going to be basically the same thing, then I feel like I think that's a great idea. I definitely have the capability of splitting my time between Itokapewa and that, because I'm very, you know, I love working on multiple things. So
yes, and you know, I don't want to like just be like nations yeet. It's more like
no, of course.
But
you're right.
Change the focus.
Change the focus. Much like the focus. Oh, excuse me. Hold on, let me mute.
Hi. What's up? Because we are doing a recording of this conversation.
There's a little black Pomeranian in the neighbor's back garden, and it's very cute.
Thank you for telling me about the little black Pomeranian.
This will be perfect for our recording session.
Little black Pomeranian.
But
yes, this will be perfect.
But I literally just need to write down the history of tieflings, and I'll pretty much be done.
Yeah, and I'll be able to hop in and talk about magic stuff with you, Pies. I do think that a great idea. The sooner we can finish the fabric of the world lore, as I'm just gonna call it, fabric of the world, has everything to do with the Void and magic. Then I think we'll have a much easier task making every nation and all of their lore and all their history feel a lot more cohesive. Arkin, welcome to the recording.
What's all this scheming and plotting going on in here?
Yes, scheming and plotting in the general chat. we're having a little mini discussion.
Oh dear.
And we're recording it. We're just chatting about stuff.
I'm talking about shifting focus to nations, from nations to the magic and the void, since those things have yet to be set in stone, and it's very important that we get the fabric of the world down before we do the things with the nations.
Yeah, and I agree, because if we figure out, okay, this is, you know, how magic works, this is how the nature of things are, it allows us to, you know, we can use that to inform the histories of the nations and make them even though they won't be like the same history, there'll definitely be some things. There can be some consistencies between them that we could hint at and use to, you know, show that, okay, there definitely is an origin of things. There definitely is a way that things have happened in the past, and we can tell because humans have an account of one thing, elves have an account of another thing, but they could vaguely be talking about the same thing.
It makes it look like things like this and the rotting plague and stuff. These things that happened and that exist in our world, tie us all together and make it like so we're not each an island that we just inhabit separately. We all will be living in the world and interacting with the world, how the world works, and interpreting it maybe slightly differently. And if I could
mention tone again, I feel like that's a great way, because the more I feel like we discuss the nations like as a whole, making up all of Eden, and the more we talk about that kind of thing. I feel like generally the theme is starting to skew towards an idea, ideas of shared histories and interpretations and biases related to of and relating to those histories. I think that is a very interesting topic and something that I feel like if we keep that in mind when writing our lore, it'll just add to the experience that we're hoping to build.
So I was listening to the last meeting, and Jackie wanted to make a calendar team and said it wasn't very important, and then Snow was like, yeah, it's really important, actually.
It's incredibly important.
That we need to work on a
I will be honest, I don't know shit about things when it comes to calendars, but I trust you guys to like figure
it
it out.
would help a lot to
would
make
you
a
like
timeline
me-
so that we can help. It would help people develop their own nations and their own people, because they can look at the timeline like, oh, this major event happened here and this one happened here, and then we
So
can
yeah, I think I think a general timeline. I think what would be a great idea is a general timeline of events that we can say for sure this is what's happening. Hi there, Lion.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm just here. Hold on.
Yeah, no, it's good. So, like I said, I think what would be a great idea is if we have a general timeline for lore masters, lore team only to look at and say, this is what has happened, these are events in the past that are true. And then what we could do is have a public timeline related to the nations of interpretations and possible skewings of those events. So
For example,
that way...
I'm sorry. For example, for the Azari Shin. So this is all hush hush. This is like, things that should not be shared with the players since it is a later date. The Azari Shin are the Azari Soul, or the Soul Elves. They were massacred, and the stories typically follow that it was the Dark Elves. It was not. It was the High Elves, and so they have been out. They're just out vibing in the ocean right now, and they've been there for at least 1,000 years. So those are basically things that would have to be skewed in real time, for the players. And they might not even know the exact date for when that happened. They just might be like, oh, the Age of Fallen Spires, which is an age in the Elven lore. And then it kind of is like, somewhere along here, somewhere the Soul Elves were killed. And then it just moves on.
Yeah. Another good example is the origin of the Quetzalcoatl. I know that I would like them to canonically be the youngest race. They granted they've still existed for eons, but in terms of other races, they came way later. And I want their appearance to be kind of viewed as different from every other race. Like maybe every nation might have a history of when their people first encountered lizardmen in the jungle. When they first, something like that. Maybe the jungle used to be a wild place that people were afraid of exploring, and then as people got more comfortable with exploring it, they found, oh, lizardmen exist here. We don't know how they got here. Or maybe they do, maybe some of them might have some idea as to how they, got there, and how do I put it? And maybe all of them have different interpretations of when they first appeared. I think that's a really cool idea. I feel like that, is, and I feel like that's an important concept, especially in relation to Itoka Pewa, if I'm going to be a little Itoka Pewa-centric.
So how are we going to set up this calendar team? Is it just going to consist of people roaming around the nation lore and seeing what they can piece together, or what?
I think what we can do... I don't think we necessarily need a specific team for it. What we could probably do is have a few of us just, working on it and allow people to submit and pitch events that could be added to the calendar.
Indeed. I think we should work closely with if that's the case, I think we should work closely with the community team and make sure that, if we do have like a calendar, I don't think we need like a designated team per se, but definitely because that team would kind of be on the outskirts simply because we don't have a calendar developed yet, so nobody even knows what to put on on the calendar. That doesn't exist. So what we really need that should go into like the fabric of the world is a general overall calendar.
Yeah, and that's a great idea. So one thing that we could definitely add on that calendar is this plague, which I still have to read up on because I don't know much about it. But that's a great thing. We could start by saying, okay, this is a canonical event. Everyone was affected by this event in one way or another. What are events that, in a broad sense, just affected a lot of people? You know, and what are their interpretations? Yeah, and then what are those? Yeah, and then what are those people's interpretations of those events? So let's say there was a huge earthquake. Maybe that earthquake could have destroyed some buildings in one nation, and they viewed it as the wrath of their deity. And one might see it as the day in Earth Elemental, got angry at them for something. I'm just pulling that out of the top of my head.
I think it's really important to establish a calendar anyway, because I know, like, personally, I've been having a lot of trouble trying to write up Tiefling lore, because I don't know what the fuck to put on there. It's like, hey, they roam around. Sure, I'm gonna include when certain settlements were made, but what else am I supposed to put on there? I have no idea.
Another thing is that having a calendar for, in general, will help with when I write the calendar for the Quetzalcoatl and Ditos Capegua, because they're actually going to be using a different calendar from everyone else. That's going to be hard, but I'm going to do that because I think it's really cool.
Yeah, because like I think it's a great idea, and I think it'll help nations establish history for their own people. Based around these major events that were included, and that
like the Tieflings
should definitely slap it on the world.
We have celebrations and stuff, but we have a whole week dedicated to when the plague first started, and they're the days of mourning on our calendar, and that's how we interpreted that that event. We've actually made a whole kind of celebration around it, and that's important. And I would like to know more world events that happened that would influence all the people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a great way of dealing with the idea of a calendar and, big events that, shook the world. Because if we are going for the theme of, how history can be interpreted in different ways, then it's important that we have history that can be interpreted in different ways. And it's important that,
It would also help us figure out how our races view each other.
Exactly.
Like everyone, I guess, is supposed to kind of blame the High Elves for the rotting plague, even though it's not their fault, but it came from them. And how did other races interpret that? And how do we do them today? Like, are we still trusting of High Elves?
How is the rotting plague connected to High Elves again? I just heard it came from the High Elves, but
I don't know much
is this information you got from Kriegsman?
Yeah, it's from
Ignore
Kriegsman.
it. Ignore it.
Ignore it?
Yeah.
I thought he was it.
No, it's bullshit.
So
he just told you the human perspective. The thing is that it came from Hadriana because people there don't shower and stuff. And but the Hadrians blame the High Elven mages for it. So I think Kriegsman told you the bias, human perspective of the whole thing, and not the actual story.
The actual plague originated in Hadriana due to lack of cleanliness, and I'd assume bringing livestock into the city, which is generally how plagues actually begin.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I should probably try and figure out if and how that plague might get to Ito Capegua, because what could be interesting is that potentially Ito Capegua could have been just completely unaffected by the plague, or something like that. who knows? Because no one might have, because maybe at that time no one visited the jungle. They weren't as open to tourists at that time until the mulata came in and started, opening the borders up for tourism and people living there. Something like that. I don't know. That's
say
just
that,
one example.
that the plague hurt the high elves really badly, though?
No.
No, he said it barely affected them at all.
The whole thing, the whole reason why the Hadrian, mostly the church, decided to blame it on the elves, because the elves seem to not be affected by the effects of the plague. I mean, our livestock died and our crops went to shit, but the elves themselves seemed not to get sick and die.
But they still
and
experienced a famine.
Yeah, for sure, and that's why the elven population thinned out before
So
the server starts. But it's not
for the rotting plague, so that all the events that we know about, everything we know about the rotting plague, can be viewed by everybody instead of just running on hearsay.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely I guess that's the importance of having a calendar detailing how an event occurred without any historical interpretation to boot, purely for us to reference for our own lore. So that way, when people are reading over the other lore for the other nations, they'll get differing accounts of this plague and what that could have caused it, and stuff like that. Just conflicting accounts, but of the same event. So fits the theme. Differing interpretations of the same history.
This brings up another problem that we have. As like a side note or something, a lot of the nations can keep whatever they're working on secret so that we all can't see what they're doing. It would be nice if everybody was working on Google Docs that they can share with everybody else so that we can see what they're working on, instead of like, oh, what are you guys working on? Oh yeah, well, we just talk about it in voice chat. It's like, well, then how are we supposed to know what your nation is doing? And
Yes, I do intend on
you guys.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think a directory is a great way of doing that. A master document of pretty much every single piece of lore that is currently being worked on, with links to all of those documents, would be a great way to navigate all of the mess of lore that people might be writing.
And that'd be especially helpful for the wiki team.
Yeah, especially
Yeah, exactly.
Because a lot of these guys are just keeping their stuff secret, and it's like, well, you need to tell us.
I do intend on opening communication.
Yeah. So So definitely lore directory should be something added to the to-do list.
I did.
I think something that
perfect.
needs to be mentioned is the fact that a lot of these nations have started without any coherent connection or history or basis. That's already been kind of addressed with the whole calendar thing, but where did these come from? Why did these nations form? What are their origins? How do they connect to each other and stuff like that? A lot of these nations are world built for their location and stuff, and that's fantastic, but it doesn't connect to the rest of the world around them. It's these sort of mini islands, and that's where I kind of want to say maybe we should look into why they came to be in their locations and why they think certain ways about people, and then edit or change the word, because we have fantastic base ideas for each nation, which is great, but there is a definite lack of specification with some of these that could be used, or connectivity, or however you want to put it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that is definitely something that should be considered. However, I understand that, a lot of people have different lore writing processes, and some people might not think as far back as the origins of people. Even though I, highly recommend it, it might be difficult for some people to do that, and we have to kind of acknowledge that, not everyone writes lore the same way. Not everyone might be...
That's okay. And I think a timeline of events will probably help people.
I think a timeline of events definitely will aid in that. I definitely think one way we could aid in helping people write, that kind of lore for You know, that
we do
is
have
just
some primordial lore.
Yeah.
We have the Priscuses. The Prisci?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with
Yeah,
that term,
so-
but they are like elementals of some kind.
yeah.
There's mentions of Titans. Arkan has mentioned Titans. Yes, you, Arkan. I don't know what the Titans are.
Okay, so
I think that should be added to the fabric of the world is primordial gods, those kind of things.
that's what we were going to include in the
Uh-huh.
void. At least that was my plan, was
Yeah.
to include primordial gods and what the deal is there. Because how each race interprets the void is completely up to them, and for that reason we want a little ambiguity, but we still want to put in the written effort for us lore masters. And I think it's important
Yeah.
to give names and associations and ideas behind each of them. Perhaps not specific forms, like, you know, this guy manifests as a deer or anything like that. But, hey, this is what this guy is known as, and this is what he does, and these are his symbols.
So, I have a potential idea that I think will aid in figuring out the origins of nations and races. Is we could potentially draft together a new document that is for lore team reference only, about, you know, just designed to, you know, prompt questions and sections about, hey, what was your people like in this era? What were they like when they first gathered as a proto-civilization? What were they like when they first, you know, had a societal boom? Did they branch off from another society? I think those are good questions to ask. I think those are good questions for everyone to have in mind anyway.
I like
And
that
if
idea
we
a
can,
lot.
and if it's something for, you know, let's say I want to have some of my race's history intertwined with another race's history. Maybe they encountered the proto-civilization of another race early on, and this this meeting kind of shaped the way they became later, because I love that kind of interconnectedness. Having that reference of other nations' early history, like ancient era type history, would be a great way of me going about that. Would be a great way to connect the world throughout its entirety, throughout its history.
Yeah,
I
Dash,
think
I really like the idea of making a document that has some questions that each lore team people the leaders can answer. And it would be nice if it was presented by Snow, so that people think that they have to answer it. That'd be nice.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's
What
a
do I
great,
need to
yeah.
present? I'm sorry.
A document for questions to help people build their thinking, like Dash said, like
Just questions prompting people to, you know, detail out the ancient history of their civilizations and nations, and, you know, the races. So, like, you know,
like when I asked the question, you know, what are your major productions in your city, but only a couple people answered me, probably because, like, they're like, why are you asking me that? I don't care. Or maybe they answered it privately, and I just don't know, because I asked Q, I don't know his name.
Izu.
Yeah, Kizu. He's like, I'll help you with your whatever, and I asked him a bunch of questions to answer, and then he just vanished, and I don't know if he ever did that.
Well, that just
Left out his nation.
yeah, that just seems like Kizu is just how they are. They don't seem very.
I will be very much putting Kizu and his little helper in the hot seat. I have a hit list, and I will be coming for them.
But yeah,
And
so imagine, you know,
seriously, because I'm not a nation leader, and if maybe Draki would have done that, people would have answered her. Because they're not answering me when I ask them questions like that. But it's a great idea to ask.
But I think, I think asking people questions of, like, you know, hey, when was your nation's, like, when was the area that your nation sits on today first settled? Why did the people decide to settle here? Those are excellent questions that people should keep in mind when building their cultures.
How did your nation deal with the plague? How did your nation deal with this and this? How do you guys view magic? Those are all really
And
good questions.
so it's great. It's a great way to keep informed and have those in your mind when coming up with your nation's interpretation of history, even though it might not be the same as what is
Speaking
actually written there.
Speaking of, Hadrians have been apparently going around sort of telling a certain version of the story or history from the Hadrian perspective, such as, for example, the Hadrianic perspective of the rotting plague coming from elves.
As if it were fact.
Yes, and so we all need to be careful about how we present our information. Like, we should be clear about what happened, and then maybe say in a separate aside, this is how we view it, rather than, or just, combining the two. Because I've seen some confusion about the Hadrian and it being said as fact, and everyone's just like, wait, what?
Because I joined, and then that's what Kriegsman said, and I was like, oh, well, he's been here longer than he must know what we're talking about. This must be fact. Okay.
Yeah, which is it's definitely getting the wrong message across, because we're being told things that we are, taking at face value. And I feel like, for the most part, these histories should be pure interpretation of events that have had their information skewed over time through the retelling of oral history and mistranslations. Propaganda is definitely a part of that.
Not everyone's friendly.
Not everyone's friendly. But regardless, just,
We're working on a whole lore team. It's like, come on, just give me the facts so that I can make my nation.
Yeah, right. Psychro, when, like, we talked about this yesterday when I was talking about how the Quetzalcoatl actually came to be. That's something I'm still figuring out. But, I wanted it to be where that story has some facts that definitely hold up in the way they tell it. But there's
some not so much.
Yeah, some not so much. I'm not sure if I should. I'll save the story that I'm considering for another day. Yeah, but that's just something to keep in mind, and something that I feel like is pertinent is to think about. Okay, when thinking about your nation's history, obviously there are going to be some things that get skewed in legends and stories, and when thinking about how they get skewed over time is I lost my train of thought, but basically
things get skewed over time and stories change. But when we're talking to other lore team members, we need to just say the facts, and either that
or
or
the consistency of the base idea.
Yeah, I said separate fact and fiction so people know what the fuck is up.
Yeah, I've actually said this to Kriegsman once before, where it is in our best interest. Am I being too loud? Okay, sorry. It is in our best interest to know things, even if players will never ever see this information. The fact that we know it and it can influence our lore is pertinent.
Yeah, so basically stop keeping everything secret. Everybody needs to use Google Docs, because this Word document shit is stop. And
I'm gonna be switching. Yeah, I'm gonna be switching to Google Docs. I will share the public Itokape wa lore dump document as I'm writing it.
Done.
You can make more than one document, because Lord, she has like 4 or 5.
Like a million.
I'm planning on dumping all the information I have into one document for the time being, and then I'm going to organize it into different documents from there. For example, I'm going to have a document of poems and short stories, because those are very important to how Quetzalcoatl communicate and how people of Itokapewa, share their history. I'm also going to have
or whatever their teams need to do. That's fine, as long as it's shareable information that we can all look at. So like, I'm making my nation, I can go into like your nation's documents and look at and see what you guys have, and see how I can make my people kind of mesh with your people in ways.
Exactly. And one thing that I actually mentioned to Moon, who is currently in AFK, that I definitely think should be mentioned here with Arkin listening in, is we need to add a section in the lore template where we talk about these nations. As you were asking, as you were talking about Pi Mom, you wanted to talk. You were asking people, prompting people questions about what do they think about other nations. We should definitely make that a section in the lore template for people to fill out, for people to talk about. That should be essential. Especially when creating a character, because I think that should be public knowledge. What do generally these people think about this? What does Hadriana think about Ariel? What does Hadriana think about this? What does Ariel think about the Tieflings?
I'm sure
having
that
all of
Ariel
those, but having all of that in the lore template will be very helpful when getting people into the roleplay, when figuring out that when role-playing between nations. Because, and that doesn't mean that everyone from that nation has to view it the same way.
Yeah, no, in general. It's just an in general kind of nation view of other nations, or
like
general.
And what they're, and what are they trading with each other? Do they have any shared holidays? Do they do any business together? Those are great things to have as public knowledge.
Oh, we should add
imports and
holidays.
exports.
We should we should include
World holidays.
holidays for each nation, because I noticed that it seems the Tieflings are the only ones that are doing that, and that's an important part of history.
Well,
anyway.
So that's definitely something we should add. So 2 things to add: relationships with other nations and holidays to the lore template.
Yep. I'm updating our to-do as we speak.
Some
Sounds good.
questions.
Arkin, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, that if you want to edit the template, just drop it at Moon's desk, because I just provided the first draft, but I don't mind any edits. And if you think something should be added to it, just tell her to edit, and it will be done. Oh, and another small note about the whole Hadrian thing. If any of you still are working based on information that Kriegsman or Thomas or any Hadrian provided you, verify it with me, because I am pretty sure that you're working from some bullshit Hadrian perspective again.
This is why, if anything, that just emphasizes the importance of a master list.
Yeah, there needs to be a master doc of general history and lore for big events. Things like the plague, things like if you come up with a big world event that might affect people, like a war or something like that. Because even if it's a war up in the north, it's going to affect people in the south, because trade relations exist. These people aren't isolated unless they're specifically isolationists, say like dwarves or something like that. They're going to have connections, and those need to be specified.
Speaking of which, that's actually an interesting point you bring up, Psychra. I don't think anyone has actually coordinated past wars with other nations, which is, definitely something that would have happened. Like, just by
tensions.
Just by the nature of having differing civilizations sitting on different resource pools.
And like the orcs, they maybe they are kind of warmongering, and they started a war or something, and they got dwindled down because they're the ones who lost the war, and that's how they got pushed down to where they are right now, into little niche people.
Here is my idea to account for that. Once an initial lore document, or I guess initial, nation document has been reviewed and approved, it is then up to the nation leader to have a discussion with other nation leaders about shared history, which will aid in that, document of what happened in these ancient times before written history, before that document. We can maybe even add sections of talk of, in brackets, what is your shared history with, the other nations. Ask, and then in brackets, talk to other nation leaders in bold, in all caps. Something like that.
Learn on an idea like, hey, this is how my nation handles your nation, and what happened with us in the past.
We could, like that could probably be just its own section. Past wars is a great, idea to add to that. Previous wars. Just welcome back. In case you want, we were talking about how to coordinate shared histories between nations.
I can type out all my recommendations for like what might be like good for past history and stuff, because it's something I think about when developing D&D societies and stuff.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That would be awesome.
Because,
I think that would be great.
One of the examples that I have from a campaign is that it was based in a colony in a jungle with lizards and tabaxi and stuff like that for people who have played D&D. And they had conflicts from the merchant nation that was invading because they had rare resources. And so it became this conflict that could be seen throughout the nation and between the peoples. The lizardmen and tabaxi were often very aggressive towards anyone who was outside of their circles, more so than they had in the past because of the current climate. And in the colonies and towns in that area, you would find slaves of tabaxi and former tribesmen because they had been taken captive during the fights. So it's like, those are important factors to decide before we open the server, because it, especially when you have predeterminations, it sets the climate for the server. And it's very important.
For sure. Furthermore, like as we've talked about before, this just adds to an overall tone of the server as a whole, making sure that all of these nations, as you've said before, Psychra, aren't islands. They are, interacting with each other, and they have interacted with each other constantly throughout history. It just makes everything feel like they belong together. And that's what I, am striving for.
Together meshes in the world instead of, we have, right now, it seems like all these nations are little islands that they don't, leave their own homeland, so they don't know anything about other people, and that's really weird.
Yeah.
It wouldn't happen.
Uh-huh.
I also want to see more diverse nations, in a sense that I want to see nations that have multiple races, because we have a lot that are single nations. And for some of them, it makes a lot of sense, and I'm okay with that. For some of them, not so much.
I think High Elves can have a past due to xenophobia and stuff like that. They might allow people
High
to
Elves
enter
is a
the
fantastic
nation.
example of where it's that's fine, that's good. But there's some that it's just like maybe.
Yeah, that's why I thought, okay, Ito Kapewa has no reason not to let outsiders live in there. They're very open to people, and and sharing of ideas. They would totally let people. They would totally let people live within their borders. However, they'd probably expect them to adhere to a bunch of societal norms, as is common when you're immigrating to societies that are vastly different than your own. There's going to be culture shocks. There are going to be societal norms that you're also expected to follow, even though you've never actually lived there until recently. But, these things exist. These things, happen. And it's not like they can make exceptions, for new residents.
If I may vocally raise my hand. Something just popped into my head. Why don't we separate nations and races? Because races
That's something I've wanted for so long. Please.
Yeah, because
sorry,
I was just looking at all of my documents and shit. I'm like, tieflings need a giant fucking dock. But with diversity and with all of this is, the tiefling nation isn't just tieflings. It is no. And No needs its own document. It needs something separate from the tieflings so people know what its deal is. Starting out with Itakapewa, it's its own nation that includes a shitload of draconians, but it's its own place. It's like saying Chicago is only full of, white dudes. That's not right. Describing
and that's,
Chicago as only being full of white dudes.
Yeah.
That's not its priority.
And that's exactly, yeah, and that that's a great point. Trying to, if we separate the idea of nations belonging to a race, I think it'll just make for easier to understand and much, more and much better lore, in my opinion. Like we've already named all the lore documents after the nation and not the races that occupy them. And of course, each nation will have a predominant race that has lived there much longer, or has will at least have a predominant race that knows the culture. And then they'll have, minority races that might have their own subcultures, but still participate in the culture in their own way, because you can't change. Yeah.
Confuses new players, and I think that they feel like, oh, well, if I want to be this type of character, I have to live in this nation, and that's not the case.
It'll allow for, elves and humans to live in, Itokapewa. It'll allow for a lot of people. It'll allow for them to kind of have their own little sections of the peasants' quarter. They will allow them to, try and compete with the, with Quetzalcoatl for stuff like that. And I'm sure it'll work very well for stuff like, Hadriana. Like I could imagine a small tiefling community in Hadriana. Or maybe, hell, what would be really cool is like a tiefling community that, rather than living in Nu, they could just nomadically move between nations and cities, just, on their own, trying to find their own way through the world.
Nomads of nomads.
I think, yeah, nomads of nomads. I think that's going to be really
that could
cool.
be fun, yeah. But I was just thinking about that, because I was looking at my tiefling doc, and I'm like, this is a tiefling doc. Yeah. This is not a no doc. Shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's not bad. It's something that I'm glad you've realized, because it's a mistake a lot of people make, and it's really an easy fix.
Yeah.
I just realized I am just a talking face right now.
It's
gotten really dark in my room really fast.
I need a long doc and I need a short doc.
Yeah.
So,
I put my notes in text and voice if people want to look at that. If you need just advice with world building and nation building and things like that, I would love to help, because I am huge on that stuff. That is like my forte. Yeah. I love that.
Another step we could take in this regard is to actually have, documents about the nation, and then documents about the race in terms of, general builds, physiology, and how they may differ in other nations.
Right.
I think that's a great distinction to make. Saying, hey, if you're playing a lizard person or, a human, then generally speaking, this is what the average look. The majority of them live in this nation. However, if you're in this nation, you might have a different hair color, or a different skin color, or a different accent, You might speak the language here. You might be part of this little sub-community that exists in a little corner there,
Right. And I think that will, in a very good way, expand upon the ideas that we have established, while also kind of giving way for a more developed and wider world that's more connected, because as we've already established, everyone's kind of like an island right now, and when you're in an interconnected continent, that doesn't make sense. Look at Greece. A lot of the city-states had their own cultures, but they were heavily connected and had similarities despite their conflicts.
Oh, Moon?
Like, a lot of people like to, talk about the, the conflicts between Athens and Sparta, but they had their differences, but they had a lot of similarities. They were both early, democracies. They were both, pillars of their cultures and, societies, and a lot of them shared the same religion,
So I have a very important question for Moon.
Yes.
Now that you are large and in charge, is there going to be a fucking word cap on our documents?
No. Please don't.
No.
Don't do
Good.
this. Don't do
Because
this. Don't do
Draki
this.
Oh
Don't
my
and
do this.
God.
Nighty told me that the tiefling doc was too long, and I am still mad.
Oi! Oi! Oi!
Yeah, I
One
was
second.
worried
I gotta
about
turn
that.
on the streamer light for this.
Well, I wouldn't be opposed
No
to a
lore is
short...
too big.
Yes. No, you do not need to stop after a certain page
Yeah.
limit. I do sort of agree with
Oh my
that
God.
idea of like, maybe a shorthand,
Yeah.
but that has
Having
to
a
be
TLDR would be good for people who are lazy and don't like to read long things, but for us who
Yeah.
appreciate that detail, please.
Okay.
Please
Yeah,
go off.
'cause-
Basically, my attitude is go off, sis. Like,
yeah,
Yeah, you
I
can't do
agree.
too much.
I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
because like I was so when I heard that Pies, you got flack for writing something too long,
Yeah.
I got really scared because you know how hard I can go at lore.
Yeah, and I was so upset because the people that signed off on tieflings seemed to really enjoy that. Like Psych immediately came out of
Yeah.
the woodwork and went, "Yes, bitch, do it."
Yeah, I love the stuff you have for tieflings, but I don't think it should.
Who do I have to
don't
fight?
think. Yeah,
Draki, but
So-
I already
Draki
assumed
and Nighty.
but I do. But yeah,
Wiki team does
I
not
don't
care how much you
yeah.
put in for lore, so like do whatever you
Uh-huh.
want. I'll
Thank
copy
you,
and
Wiki
paste
team.
whatever into the thing. So.
Yeah, so
I'm just here to listen.
I do think that
Glad
it
you're here,
is
Ryan
definite.
Files. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. But in terms of a TLDR document just listing the essential bullet points, it will do nothing but help people.
Yeah.
You know,
That's what
saying
I
like
think.
hey, if you don't want to go through all of it, just make sure that you know this stuff. You know, maybe we could condense
What-
it to like.
She has her long document, and she made a short document for people to just
Yeah.
like quickly peruse, and then if they like
Like,
the
you know.
tiefling lifestyle,
Exactly.
they can make that a character and know,
Or
and then they can
Yeah.
read the long document at
Or-
their convenience
Yeah.
while reading.
maybe
One
what
thing
we
that
could
I-
do
yeah.
instead of
Mhm.
having to make two separate documents, because that would be annoying for anybody trying to do the wiki. Hello.
Mhm.
What? Sorry.
Is you can
Oh.
just include
Yeah,
introductions or summaries at the
Yeah.
beginning of each section.
A TLDR.
Here's a
Yeah.
great idea. Quick start
Just
guide to
summaries.
creating a character in this nation / of this race.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Just
That's good
Yeah.
for
A starter
people.
pack.
yeah.
And the nice thing
This-
about wikis is they
Yeah.
have the little titles, and that you
Yeah.
can jump between them.
Yeah, and it'll
Mhm.
have it on
That
the
is-
side.
Yeah, because I think that's a great way. Because just a quick start guide saying, hey, everything you need to know about creating a character here, without knowing all of the without knowing everything that might not be pertinent to the roleplay. So, like, let's say you're a human in Hadriana. Great. If you the clergy's got this kind of thing going on. The knights and the royals got this thing's going on. The middle class has this. Lower class, has this. Generally speaking, you might want to play a human. If you want to play another race living in Hadriana, we recommend you do further reading. Just stuff like that, Giving people the information that they need right up front just to make a character and hop right in,
Right.
Because I understand that kind of thing. One thing I always do when I'm creating a new character for a server is I'll look through all the lore, like just generally to try and get an idea of what I'm interested in. And when I find something I'm interested in, I'll do the further reading. And I always like if there's further reading, because it means I can go in depth. It means I can try and figure out what my character might be an expert at in that regard, how my character might fit into that society. But so having the a little at a glance section for these societies and for these races, and then the depth
Yes.
that
It definitely
Yeah.
makes it more palatable. Because for me,
Yeah.
like, if I'm already looking at a role play server, I'm already itching to
Mhm.
go. I'm already like, let's go. Booga
Yeah.
booga. And so,
exactly.
but with my ADHD, if I see a whole block of text, it's like I walk in and I walk right back out. I'm like,
It gives me anxiety if there's too many words in a thing. Like I have word count anxiety really bad. So I do see a nice little condensed version, but then when I pick that, I'm like, oh yeah, I want to be this race. I want to know more. I want to know everything about them.
exactly.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I try and like I said, when it comes to from what I know, when it comes to researching for my own things, and especially reading through documents for lore, I always think, okay, what is pertinent to the character I need, and then I just don't read anything else because I want to be able to get into it. I might read other things if it interests me, but overall, so definitely having, information that people want, be easy to access, and, and simple to get at, while also providing them just a small taste of what it might be like to play a character from that society. I'm going to try and, avoid from that race or from that nation, but just from that society now because that, of that. But it'll give them a better idea of what they might enjoy from fables and fantasy.
Agreed.
And I think, yeah.
You're
Write
here.
that down.
Mm-hmm.
Write that down. Write that down.
Yeah.
Write that one.
Yeah. This might mean a slight overhaul to lore templates, which might upset some people. I am willing
Do
to.
what we must.
I am willing to make that
Progress.
sacrifice.
It's a sacrifice I'm willing to make.
Huh?
I should.
You should where?
Where the fuck did you come from, Mr. Zombie Man?
Is there one in the mudroom?
I feel so ridiculous in this very short chair and
That's
looking up
no
and seeing my
permission.
face.
Let you do whatever you want.
I just
I
stare
want to see
into the void.
diversity in nations.
So,
I could have
Yeah.
sworn I had a guess.
we're gonna probably now need to make 2 lore templates. One for the specific race, so that'll have everything from physiology, biology to
Some races.
to potential communities and subcultures that may exist around the world of Eden. Then we have the documents relating to the nations, and they might talk about the nations in regards to a predominant race that lives there, like for example the High Elves in Ariel. Now here's an interesting thing: just because Ariel is High Elves only does not necessarily have to mean that High Elves don't live elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
For example, For example, I think it would be really interesting if we had stuff like embassies and diplomats for that level of
had
political roleplay. Yeah.
I would suggest that start in a roleplay unless it's predetermined that those nations are allies, because Diplo RP's fun.
Yeah, so for example, Itokapewa might have a Wood Elven embassy and especially, or an embassy for Nu to have for, because Nu is actually going to be a huge trade partner with Itokapewa. Likewise, it would make a lot of sense for, yeah. And it just makes it easier for, there to be communication between those two nations and organization of the sort. So let's say an Itokapewa-ish caravan, I don't know what to call that. Let's say a caravan from Itokapewa wants to be able to stop by Nu on their travels. They might be able to approach the embassy and say, hey, where is Nu this time of year, considering your city moves about? Yeah. And they'll say, okay, it's over here. And then they can be like, great, so it has moved. Yes, it has moved. Well, then I can jot that down on our map, and we can account for that there, so we can sell our pottery and our glassware. And our exotic foods.
I know that the Nu and the Azari Shun will be having a very interesting relationship. And the most interesting relationship will be the one with the High Elves.
Yeah. Conversely, tensions are going to be a fun thing to explore. And, this is why I think having these relations here, having relations with nations in lore section.
keep hearing the Hadrians talking about taking over other places.
Oh,
Oh
no,
yeah,
not this again.
I've heard Kriegsmen were talking about, like, you know, marching into the forest and saying, you know what will happen when we see trees? Fire. And I'm like, are you guys really talking about starting a war right now?
We also had they vote.
Why is it always the human nation?
Well, you know,
Like-
humans, I guess.
Yeah, like I just want Itokapewa to be, you know, a friendly nation that's open to visitors and, you know, new ideas and sharing art and stuff like that, without the hassle of trying to, you know, expand their land. Because they don't care about expanding their land. They just care about, you know, they care about having the city of Itokapewatlaka and their volcano. That is all they need. But at the same time, it would be very interesting if people have tried to, you know, siege their city in the past.
Combat, our roleplay combat system.
So, is that something for lore team to develop?
No, that is something more for just like general staff to talk about.
Yeah, because I you know, because I'm sure all of us have our different opinions on what roleplay combat should be, and you know,
Detailed.
All I'm gonna say is,
Yeah.
on the topic of like tensions with like nations, make sure it makes sense in lore. That's
Yeah, of
gonna
course.
be a very
There's
big
gotta
thing
be a
for me.
Casus Belli!
Look.
of course,
I came
yeah.
from a server, didn't make any sense. I wanted to die. It was horrible.
I hate
went to war
yeah,
with
I
us
hate-
because we insulted their leader and
yeah,
that was it.
yeah.
I'm gonna OC
We said
protect.
we,
Oh.
we said mean words.
Wars
We'll not have
are
another council. I will not allow it.
I know why you left them in there.
Thank you.
Nobody else.
come on, like I want I want, you know, people love war stories because they're engaging, not just because they're violent. There's got to be a lot of tension there. Besides, you insult me, war. No,
It's
you gotta
literally
be like,
That's
Oh my
literally
God,
what
so
happened, and it was
boring.
very
It was
funny.
so-
yeah, no, I hate that. I think it is always more interesting if there is something dire at stake that
Yeah.
makes war an option. Hey, so like, you know,
Like the
so
killing
like, you know,
of a diplomat or
imagine,
something
you
like
know,
that.
you know,
That was interesting for sure.
you know. So imagine this is saying, you know, sir, we you know, we have run our iron mine dry. Well, what can we do? It's like, well, we've been talking trade deals with, you know, this nation which has, you know, plentiful iron, but because they understand that our situation is, you know, drastic. We are now out of metal. They've raised their prices. We can't afford to keep up. It was like, what are our options? We could raise taxes. No, we've already had to raise a tax over this. What else can we do? It's like, you know, we could have a meeting with them. It's like, okay, we can have a meeting with them. Meeting doesn't work. They're still talking about that. It's like, what else can we do? We could go to war. Is war really necessary? We need iron. We can't survive without iron. Very well, war it is. I love those kinds of stories. Those are always way more interesting.
Fantastic.
Yeah, like
I mean, I'm just pulling that out of my ass here, but you
it's a
know.
lot better than being insulted and going to war over that.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
like
Especially out of character, like
oh my
no.
God. Just don't let
Yeah.
people OC project. It's literally the worst thing in the world.
Mhm.
It's so.
I will.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's definitely something that'll have to be figured out, is how wars might be waged. Because while I do agree,
It's like.
because while I do think that it would be definitely a good idea of, you know, making a war claim with a casus belli in mind, and you know, what's at stake, and you know, what battles where they might be placing their attacks. On the other hand, I could definitely see the benefits of, you know, or I could definitely see a situation where someone might want to, you know, do a, you know, a blitz attack, a surprise attack, you know, where a nation has no time to prepare. As a
Well,
tactic.
of course, but
right.
there should still be a reason. Like, oh, this nation has
There
a
should always
resource
be a
that we
reason,
don't have.
but you know,
wanna
that's
share.
my idea. Is you know, so we could probably actually have these war claims be sent to admins in private, and if they want it to be, you know, like a blitzkrieg type situation where they're just storming in, no time for the enemy to prepare, then they could be like, okay, yeah, we can try and plan for something like that. But that's much further in the future.
Idea. There's
That's
a
your
form
idea.
that they have to fill out for their in-character reason for attacking and/or declaring war on a nation, so admins can review it and make sure it is a valid casus belli and not just expansion to be expansion in power.
Only issue is bias. People might have bias towards it.
I think, which is why I feel like one way we could
it-
settle that is a vote. We could have people
Right,
vote for
voting
if
systems
this...
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that
people
would-
who are in that nation, like if a certain lore member is in that nation or a certain community manager is in that nation, they aren't involved in the vote. That's what I used to do.
They could abstain
I have-
from the vote. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm. I do think a detailed war form is a great idea for if people want to go to war. I do think we should try and keep war at a minimum for the most part.
At least at the beginning.
To not make it, you know, at the very, for the most part at the beginning. Like, you know, let's say, hey, you know, we might have wars, but we are not a war server, you know?
This isn't war RP, this isn't factions RP.
Yeah.
This is a fantasy.
Yes. Conversely, I feel like the war form should also again detail out some, you know, some parts of their attack
war form
that, you know, yeah, like the form that they need to get their war approved by an admin team. So let's say, you know, they need to list character reasons for why they're, you know, declaring war. They need to, and not just that, they need to also list the specific locations they might be trying to seize, because, you know, a war might be fought over a resource. If they capture the resource, then the war could be as good as over, you know? So,
right.
You know, a simple war could just be, you know, a war to capture a city that controls an iron mine. That might lead to a retaliation to that would continue the war, but overall, you know, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so why are you going to war? Great, you know why. Now, where are you trying to attack? And, you know, what are... I don't know. Yeah. We could also probably have them list the resources they will have going into the war, I think is a good idea. So let's say, you know, so that way we don't have people say, we're looking over a war farm and saying, oh yeah, that's pretty good. That makes a lot of sense. It seems fair, approved, and then they come in with like 12 ballista, and we're like, "Whoa, where did you get 12 ballistas?" Like, we made it, and we're like, "I don't remember you guys making 12 ballista."
It fell off the back of a wagon.
Yeah.
Fell off the back of the wagon right in our main capital.
So, you know, let's say, you know,
What?
So let's say, you know, how many units of an army do you have? Like, you know, it could be something like the Roman Legion, or, you know, whatever other units we might call.
We had that question post-test with the creation of our nations. I think Arkun was going around asking people about their military and that we have to have a military building.
Well, I think that's a great. I think that's included in the document. That is another thing to add to the nation document. Yep, separate from the race document, because I do think those should be separate documents now.
Yeah, it should be on the nation doc.
I thought it was already a requirement.
As far as it's not in the template.
Because Arkin's been asking everybody, or I know he asked me, and I know I know he asked you, Dash, because I heard you talking about like, well, we don't really have a military. What we have is, and then you explained it, and I'm like, yeah, that's what tieflings have too. We don't have a military building, but we're horse people. I could build a stables instead of a military building. Is that okay? And he's like, yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like, you know, yeah, they don't. Yeah, Itokapewa does not have a formal military, but in times of war, the Talakwe Wali, which are their elite group of warrior women, will be summoned back home to become their military.
Yeah, that's what tieflings have too. We have
Actually,
we have a militia.
Now that I have a really that's really interesting. This is very off topic, but now that I'm it's somewhat in topic. Now that Itokapewa can include other races, should I also allow other races to potentially become a Talakwe Wali? That could be really interesting.
No, they shouldn't have to go through a whole big, huge thing. Like, if you aren't born into this position, you need to fucking earn it.
Yeah, so they can, but it's really hard for them.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's the thing, is that Talakwe Wali are trained from the moment they become a toddler. Yeah.
If you're not born into that race, it's going to be hard for you. If you just
However, it could potentially be. There could be. I think it could be possible, but there would be a lot of prejudice saying, you know, a non-Quetzalcoatl becoming a Talakwe Wali. What is this? You know, like, yeah, it's like, keep in mind, we welcome you guys here. We welcome you to sell your things within our city, but to become, you know, this elite part of our culture, unheard of. If you want that, you need to prove that you are Quetzal. Yeah. Like, that's a cool idea. I'm gonna refrain from talking about it now so we can get back on track. But I just wanted to I just wanted to bring that up. Yeah.
So what do we have? Oh, also we should include certain laws as part of the military section, because that's something we did. I feel is super important. Like, what are the no-nos of your place?
Yeah.
What will get me executed?
So that might be another thing to think about in terms of the nation lore rework, because this has definitely become a huge nation lore rework.
Yeah.
So I know Hadriana has been going into their laws. We should definitely have everyone write a book of laws, a compendium of laws and stuff like that.
We're talking about when you're making cultures up. It's crime and punishment, and there needs to be a whole section for it, because it's very, very important. Because like when you're playing in the world, and you need to know each law of each town that you want to go to.
Yeah,
so that
exactly.
you certainly break their laws, and then they come out of nowhere with like, oh, that's an executable offense, and now we're going to kill you. And it's like, I don't even know what I did wrong.
Because,
are you just being racist, or did I actually do something?
Yeah, that's like, you know, I don't know for other nations, but I do know that I've been sort of playing around with some ideas for laws, especially for punishments in Itokapewa, and a definite punishment for, you know, so a basic punishment you might get in Itokapewa if you break a law is you're put into slavery for X amount of time. And the worse the law you break, the longer you're put into slavery, up until the point where you might be put into slavery for life, and for things like murder and bad shit and treason, you might be put into slavery for like 10 years, and then you're sacrificed to the volcano.
Dash, make a crime and punishment section, and then just do what are laws, what are just taboo, like you probably shouldn't do these things.
Well, that's one thing. Is I'm wondering if crime and punishment should be like its own, its own document.
I think it needs to be a segment on the big nations doc.
Yeah.
And since we're making them two separate docs, you will have room for it. And if you want to go into extreme depths
that's a great
with
idea.
like literature and that kind of thing, then you can link that on the nation doc under it.
Yeah. So that is another thing to add to the template rework: crime and punishment under culture.
Yeah.
And society.
No, that's the thing that you should ask each nation leader. What is the crime and punishment section of
it'll
their
probably be
thing.
announced that we want to change around the templates, and then you'll be like, "This is the new template,
well,
guys."
Yeah, actually, this is a great excuse because we were talking about wanting to re-review all the lore anyway, all the like nation lore especially. Anyway, this is a great way of just doing that, saying, "Hey, we've made some big changes to the template. We want to have a higher level of scrutiny when it comes to our lore, and therefore we ask that you include more information on your lore documents. Furthermore, we've split the documents into two because we think it would be important to discuss races and cultures as two separate things. So please, understand that this might be a convenience, but it'll help with our lore." That kind of thing. Moon, I'm not sure if you know this, but you're muted.
She might be dead.
You do know? Oh, you did it, or you did not know?
I did know.
Okay, yeah, because I was just wondering if you're trying to chime in at all. I had no clue.
Oh no, I just had remembered that I had an assignment that I needed to turn in, so that's why I was
yeah.
intently at my
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
So is
yeah,
I'm listening.
is there
I did write
anything
that down.
else we want to
That is
move
good.
on to?
Well, let's take a look at the that we were talking about.
Eat. Consume.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. I did want to potentially talk about the potential well, the most definite thing that will happen of centralization, but I feel like with what we've been talking about now, we might actually be closer to solving or figuring out how to deal with that problem, which is though roleplay will almost definitely centralize in one place, the importance of trade and travel will make it so that way there will always be a reason to move around and experience the lore and cultures of different areas.
Yeah.
But I do still think, however, though we are getting closer, I do still think that centralization of roleplay is something we should definitely have a chat about, because it's something that especially in the early days, which are the most important to try and get a player base staying around and to grow one, people are going to want to be role-playing with each other. People are going to want reasons to roleplay with each other, and if people know that, hey, all the roleplay is happening in X place, people are going to go, there. That's still likely a thing that's going to happen, and even though we're giving reasons for people to travel, we should still talk about, at the very least, what our stance on dealing with, that kind of thing, because I could be very wrong. People could just instead want to just stick around one nation only and deal with all the roleplay there, because that's just where all the roleplay is,
I think
thoughts, I guess.
Probably having events for each nation, like, hey, we noticed that Itukapewa is slacking, so we're going to have a specific event for you guys, or we noticed the Silver City is slacking, so we're going to have an event for you guys to move people there to see, like, hey, this is what's cool about us.
Yeah. Does that mean that how we should deal with people staying in one place is try and encourage travel is what you're saying, right? Okay,
pretty much.
I think I can see that.
People to specific areas where we want them.
I think that's a good way of dealing with that. Goodbye, Arkin.
Whoever becomes the community manager, I think they deal with that stuff, events and things.
Yeah, but even then, I feel like the lore does in fact feed into how how we encourage people to experience the role play. people experience the roleplay through the lore. Therefore, how we write the lore is an important thing. If we write the lore to be, central in one place, then it's going to be central in one place. If we try, another hand, another thing that I should probably mention is that it's really hard to, though we might try and nudge it, it's very hard to control the way roleplay goes.
Well, I think the best way to encourage travel and encourage people to move around through RP and through lore is definitely like that specialization clause, like how certain people, like for instance old school dwarves, if you want a good blacksmith, you go to the dwarves. If you want something stolen, you go to the tieflings. If you want a mercenary, you go to Ichikapewa, that kind of thing. Like, I think making it known what the fuck this nation is good at and what they are known for will get people to go there if they need that thing.
Yeah.
In that case, I think that should also be something that is added to the document. Specialties. What is this nation, known for in terms of their, their cultural and material exports?
What I was hoping for when I asked people that question, and again, I got a couple answers. I'm like, guys, it's really important.
We should just write that into the template then.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Make it a part of the template.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing now. I'm hitting my word limit for section number 2. So.
Yeah.
I wanted to say you guys were talking about the event stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, lore is, it is very important because you guys are going to be feeding the community managers your lore, literally, and I think that's a good thing to focus on is understanding what they can do and what you can do, and then helping them understand your own lore in a sense, especially for events. Oh, what if something I don't know, something pops up, right? Like some weird event, so that they'll be like, okay. I need to know this, whatever. And then you're like, okay, and then you explain it to them or whatever, and then they'll actually oh, event happens or whatever in here. And so that's the main thing I've noticed, at least what you guys will definitely do. That's why lore team actually does have a lore team. Lore, you get it. You guys do have a very integral part with it. Cause you guys were confused about it, but yeah.
And I do think, that talking about these things is definitely going to be helpful because from what I have now realized, these things have not been talked about in depth much, and that's it's unfortunate because I feel like with lore being the heart and the core of any roleplay, we need to
So what do you got so far?
Yeah, figuring out exactly how the lore functions and making sure that everyone maintains a high level and consistent level with everyone else's quality of lore. It'll make sure that even though all of our lore is going to be written by a bunch of different people, it all feels like it belongs in the same place. And at the end of the day, it is it's a hard thing to do, but it's important to make sure that the lore doesn't feel like it belongs to, the lore doesn't feel like it exists on its own. The lore feels like it is the world.
I have a side question that I've been wondering.
Yes?
These nation leaders, actually Snow brought it up in the last meeting. She said something like, we need to make sure that the people that lead nations want to do the job, if they're capable of doing the job and all that. And so how did these nation leaders become nation leaders? Did they just...
It was pretty much just ask Archon. There was no application process or anything like that. There was no review process. If you
don't
want
like
to be
being
a
Only-
nation
okay,
leader, you get to be
The
a
only
nation
person
leader.
who was reviewed was Max, which is my friend who's the leader of Al Qadir, because
Yeah.
they were looking for someone else. She was
Yeah.
the only one that was reviewed to my knowledge.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
they were
I was
trying to fill in
never-
an existing
yeah.
position. But Dash and I were never
it should be,
reviewed.
though.
Yeah.
To my
we were
understanding,
never reviewed,
Draki
but we
was
were
never
also
reviewed.
referred. Yeah, we
I
were
don't
also
think Frank was
recommended
ever
by
reviewed.
Arkin, himself. I know.
Yeah.
I don't think Moon was ever reviewed. I don't think. Yeah, I feel like no one's been reviewed, which is again, when I found that out.
Apparently
brought up
interviewed
Talked about
And that's crazy
Yeah,
to
I
think
brought that
about.
up. Yeah,
And
I
that's
I
probably
was shocked.
one of our problems,
Is
that all these people that are nation leaders right now, the first people that became nation leaders, they're just like, yeah, I'll take a nation. I have some ideas for something, and then they started on it. They were never asked if they're capable of doing that job, or if they're like really busy in life, or
Well, all things
But
Right, and
considered,
leadership
Mother,
positions can be
things
very
are
stressful.
going pretty well,
Yeah.
Speak from
despite
experience.
that.
So does mine.
Yeah, that's really true. Yeah. For example, like I love working on the lore for Itokapewa,
We're
but I
three
never.
nations.
But when I first started on it, I didn't actually, and I actually didn't want to at first be the leader of Itokapewa. I just wanted to write the lore because I'm like, oh no, I want to, work on some other things. I don't want to be the leader. I might want to play a part in Itokapewa, but not as the mulata. But, over time, I thought it would be interesting if I start off as the leader, but have her be corrupt, and then eventually, the thing. So I figured it out. But I understand that some people might just want to work on a nation's lore without necessarily taking a leadership position in the roleplay.
well, yeah.
That might be something to think about.
Sorry.
Is well, that might be an
Huh?
interesting thing to think.
Talk about for a moment.
Oh, no, I like writing lore. What?
No, not
Yeah.
that. Never mind.
So So what I'm thinking of is it might be a good idea to ask: does someone want to write nation lore that does not necessarily want to be, the nation's leader in the role play? Because those two things seem to be.
That's what
Those
everyone
two
else
things seem to be. Yeah.
like. If like when I was added on,
Mhm.
it was just to help. I'm just a helper.
Yeah. Because like.
Hey, I'll totally take over the wood elves if I
Yeah,
need to.
but like it seems like that writing all of the lore for a nation and then leading that nation are like put in the exact same job, and that's a lot. Like it makes sense, on like a certain.
I don't want to be a wood elf. I just would like to write that lore.
Yeah, like on paper it makes a lot of sense. Who would be the best person to lead that nation? Why the person who wrote all the lore for that nation, of course, but that doesn't take into mind what these people might want to do. Like, for example, I feel like I'd have a lot more fun just occasionally making an appearance as the Liuqui, the oracle who just lives on the volcanic island that, consists of Itokapewa's shrine.
Yeah, I
But
would much
they're
prefer
not-
to be
yeah.
a side character that has some importance, but not all of the importance. That's why I made those
exactly.
ambassador positions, so I didn't have to be the leader if I didn't want to
Exactly.
be.
Because, like, I would much rather have that as, like, a side character who just shows up every now and then whenever people want to, make an important law or an important decision and needs the input of the, of the Queen Dragon. I think that way she could train acolytes and that would be the way people interact with Itokapewa's version of magic, which is, very much about reading and the volcano and practicing worship techniques involving magic to soothe the Queen Dragon in her slumber. Those are the parts of roleplay that I'd be interested in. I don't necessarily want to lead,
So
even though I feel like okay, it'll be fun to lead for like a little bit and then have Yatsiri get axed off.
yeah, well, my thought is, at this start, anyway, we could have the leaders of the nations act as side characters but the requirement is that whoever leads the nation has to have worked on the teams that made the nation, so they won't go off the rails with it, but it shouldn't have to be your main character. I think an exception to the one and only rule should be made to those of us that are working on this lore so hard and still want to be a player.
I think that's a really good compromise. Like, you know, having it so, okay, if you want to be the leader of this nation, then you have had to have worked on the lore. You've had to have had a hand in its creation, in its, you know, conception, in tweaking it, editing it, something. But yeah, I think that's a great way of dealing with that. I think that's yeah. You good, Snow?
Yes, I've just been editing Stephen's
I just now noticed Arkin's like, I get to keep my private channel, and you're like, it has words in it.
So yeah.
Nice cleaning up.
It has words.
So is there anything else we should discuss?
I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
Organization of lore.
Well, yeah. Moon's got some ideas for organization of the lore.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
I guess, could you make a channel for the rotting plague?
That sounds so like, horrible.
I mean, it is.
I mean, it is. It's just, it's so like random. It's
it
like
sounds so bad. It's like,
it's like
the
can you
it's
make
a
channel
plague
for the rotting plague. Like what? Okay.
Anyway, so Moon, you said that you had some ideas for organizing the lore and just things, right?
I think I did, but my brain's starting to shut down, so I have no recollection of what I said. Holy shit. I write it down?
Well, then, that's definitely something that we could discuss if we wanted to discuss how everything should be organized. We have one of our wiki writers in here, so that's actually a great, you know, segue into that.
I mean, you guys can just do Google Drive and like just have like folders set up of like, oh yeah, you know, this is for races, this is for nations, this is for blah blah blah, blah whatever. And I mean, it'd be easier for me to just like look at that. And then
earlier
copy.
on, I did also suggest a directory, which could be in a Google document about, you know, all the lore that is being worked on. In terms of how that directory could be set up, it could be potentially be set up on, you know, in order of which lore member has written what lore, or it could be in alphabetical order. Or
I think having it set, I think there should be two separations. There should be a directory for nations, a directory for races, and then a directory for world and magic lore. And then within that, it should be alphabetical, so it's easy to grab.
Yes, please, alphabetical.
Okay, that makes sense. So 3 directories for different types of lore, for you know, and then all the documents that might, you know, be needed to be added there. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. That'll help when creating the wiki, which will, you know, be the database of all the lore. In terms of how the wiki itself is organized, I'm sure that'll be...
I want to.
Okay.
I love organizing shit.
Yeah, you do. You're very strange.
And I'll make a table of contents and everything.
It'll be beautiful, I'm sure.
So I'm sure that our wiki writers have their own, you know, ideas and experience with writing wikis that'll probably, you know, aid in readability. Yeah.
I mean, it's literally just, I mean, what I used to do is I would just copy and paste your lore in and be like, yeah, this is, you know, it's just very formatting, organizing, technical work. Yeah. I mean, that's mainly what it is. It's not hard. It's just understanding the, what's the word? The language in a sense, you know. So it's whatever.
Yeah. With that, there's a couple people that are. They need, you know, native English speakers to help them, and I think Cypher and Snow are helping with that, and so their ideas might be all weird and jumbled until they get to them. So.
Yeah.
I can go through each of the Discord channels and be like, hey, can you send me all of your lore files, please?
Yeah. Conversely, we could also have a little tag next to the links for them stating whether or not they are in progress or completed.
Yeah.
I think those are also a good idea.
Okay.
On the jumbled note, I remember I was reading the Hadriana lore and got very confused at times. So please, English person, please look at it again because there's some
I've already
issues.
started
lore.
What, Nate?
Yeah.
I actually
There was some-
already posted an edited version. I
Okay.
didn't finish it.
Yeah.
I didn't finish looking through it, but I basically posted in Hadriana. I was like, hey, this is what
Mhm.
I managed to do. Maybe you can learn
Please
from
tell
it.
me you got
I
rid
don't
of
know.
the flower thing.
The what?
The flower thing when they were talking about marriage.
And like a woman's flowering.
Oh, I didn't look through marriage.
Oh,
yet.
yeah.
I was so busy.
It was so uncomfortable reading that.
Oh.
City life.
Ouch.
I
was
understand
so
what they were
busy
saying, but
trying
it's
to like make their
the
city
wording
life
is so
make
bad.
fucking sense. For thing.
There-
It's
there-
like-
there
know
is
that
a section
I get
in
it.
marriage where they put it where it's like a girl can marry when
Read
they're-
it to me, please.
Uh,
I'm
here, let
begging.
me
A
pull up the
wise
Hadriana lore
reader.
because like
Oh, it's so funny.
the rest of the lore is fine. It's like, oh yeah, yield humans, but it was
Yeah.
just this that stuck with me, and I was just like, oh
I
no.
messaged you immediately, Nate.
Yeah, I was
When
like, oh, I know
saw it.
exactly what you're talking about.
I mean, I don't know. I've got. Yeah.
I
Like,
just
that
feel
just
like there's other
seems-
ways to
it's-
put it. Like when
I
they
have
come
a
of
feeling
age or
it was,
legal age,
you know,
which is like 14.
Like, I don't mind, you know, exploring some interesting aspects of lore in that regard. Interesting is a euphemism. I feel like there could be, you know, better ways
There's
of going
better
about
ways to word some things.
Am I still being very loud?
Very, very.
I am sorry.
Appearance, language, city life,
There she goes.
There she goes.
marriage.
Why
Okay.
did she scurry?
Because she doesn't want to be seen, even though she is literally a model who is appearing
Okay.
on, like, camera. It is so strange for me.
Nate, are you ready? Are you gonna have your dramatic reading?
Wait 1 second.
Let's
Let
hear
me
it.
say goodnight to my parents and then I will.
Okay.
Oh goodness.
I gotta like take the biggest piss of my life, so I'll be right back.
Okay.
Let the dog out.
This is a weird time for an intermission, considering we're so close to the end.
Okay. So sad. Were you guys having a meeting in here? I literally was just here listening because I wanted to make sure if I needed to.
Oh yeah, no, we were we were recording this. We
Oh,
still
hello.
are apparently.
Hello, hello.
Da 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 da.
I'm so sorry for anyone who missed this. I'm so sorry for interrupting.
It's okay. But hey, we included you. You were included, our little lore writer, wiki writer.
Yeah, I just format and
Yeah.
do technical things.
Honestly,
And
lore
make maps,
team.
apparently, 'cause I like
Lore
making
team.
maps.
Yeah. Oh, you make maps. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I lost all my progress when my power went out, but I'm redoing it, so
Oh, man.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I wanted to try my hand at like just making maps for things. I have a software called Campaign Cartographer. It's
Oh, okay.
yeah. It's
Okay.
it's pretty
We're waiting
it's a
Hi, goodbye.
Yeah.
Just telling him.
so yeah,
But-
Ready? Are you gonna do a dramatic reading?
wrap up on
I will.
Well, yeah.
Is Pi
Hey,
back?
I would
Bye,
say,
bye.
you know,
Manners.
but anyway, I should probably mention wrap up on the idea for just organizing. Directories are the way to go. They're going to be sorted on what type of lore they pertain to, and then indexed via alphabetical order. I think that's a good way of going about it. Very easy. It'll be a lot easier to find lore you're looking for, and we can, you know, list if they're in progress or completed, and you know whatever documents that might be pertaining to these specific types of lore. Yeah.
Right.
And I can make like major documents bigger and minor documents smaller. That kind of
Yeah.
thing.
I think that's everyone here, Nate, then. So.
Yep. Let's. Are we gonna do this on the recording? This dramatic reading?
Oh, maybe
Or should we
not.
end the recording now?
It might
Okay.
be good to end the recording now. 'cause I don't think there's
So
anything
if
else.
that's
Yeah, we can
everything
probably
we
end the
want to
recording.
say,
Yeah.
That's everything we want to
I
say.
mean, there's nothing else I can think of. I've raised everything I could think of for now. I'm bound to have some more later.
Right.
All right.
Yeah,
So
that's
everybody say goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.